Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our lectures on the Exalted Treatise on the response of the dove. Let me share with you the slide. So today we're going to look at this passage. There's two parts to it. It's about disdaining the people and disrupting state administration. And what the Exalted Treatise here is essentially alerting us to two types of misdeeds, very much related in the sense of relating to people in positions of responsibility. And in the past, this would have related directly to state leaders, rulers, and their officials, because they were in this, relatively high position in society where they had responsibility over a large number of people. And so it would clearly be a misdeed to hold the people that one is meant to be serving in disdain, and cause disruption, disorder to the governmental affairs, the state. Both of these misdeeds, as you can clearly understand, would have huge consequences. One misdeed, this sort of misconduct, would have terrible impact on many people. Could be statewide. So clearly that is why the Exalted Treatise sort of alerts us to these two parts in this passage. Now, if we were to delve a little bit deeper, in the Chinese, it doesn't just refer to the people, it describes the people as heaven's people. And here I have a particular passage taken from one of the 5 classics. It's called the Zuo Tradition of Commentary on the Spring and Autumn Annals. And the Spring and Autumn Annals were records, chronicles, if you like. And this is a particular tradition of commentary on those records that related to a particular state, the state of Lu. Now, here, what's interesting about this passage is that stated to around the 4th century before the Common Era, so very early time, and it sets up very clearly that people come about and they're entrusted to the care and government of the state rulers. Heaven gives birth to the people and establishes rulers to oversee them and take care of them, not letting them lose their livelihoods. There being rulers, heaven establishes helpers for them, for the rulers, to act as their teachers, guardians, not letting them exceed their limits. So there are state leaders, and then there are also officials, their subordinates, to assist and help them with the job of looking after, governing the people. And how they do that is obviously praising the correct conduct, and in the past it would also have meant making that sort of publicly known. So there's other people can learn from those positive examples by the king, by the ruler and his officials. And obviously, when there are failures or failings, the assistants, the officials, also have a duty to correct them, to resolve problems that arise, to even change things that have been mistakes. So there are duties for everyone. And you can see that by everyone, it literally, there are scribes, the music masters, musicians, high officers, more junior officers, even the commoners had a role, merchants, they would often travel from place to place to sell their goods, and all types of craftsmen. They would also present their views through their skills in various ways to ensure that that sort of feedback would be relayed to the officials and in turn to the ruler themselves. And so you can see the sort of circle. Great indeed is the heaven's love for the people. Everyone had a part to play in achieving good government. And it wasn't the ruler themselves. They were at the apex of society, but they very much relied on many other people, from the highest officials to the ordinary person on the street. So this is the idea of heaven's people that are entrusted to the ruler. And in this next slide, that comes from another one of those early 5 classics that formed you could say, the core curriculum of orthodox classicist learning. It points out that the sovereign without the people has no one that can help them. People without the sovereign have no one to serve. So this comes from a piece of formal written advice by Yi, who you can see sort of illustrated on the left, and he has served many rulers, including the founder of the Yingshang dynasty. This is one of the earliest dynastic rulerships in the history of China, earliest periods of Chinese history. And he's about to retire. And this happens sort of just at the start of a young ruler's reign, at the very start of their sort of governmental career. And so he writes this piece of advice to remind the ruler these very important principles. And this is just one part of it. And he's trying here to remind the ruler that, yes, you're in a very important position, but your position is important because of its function to serve everyone in the empire or in the kingdom, if you like. Without the people, you can't do anything. At the end of the day, the ruler has a very important function, but they're just one person, and they certainly cannot do anything by themselves. So there is a relationship of interdependence. Do not think yourself so large as to deem others small. So don't get carried away. You're a new ruler, thinking that you're the most important person. And therefore look down on everyone else. They don't matter. And, just hold the people in disdain, to sustain the people. If ordinary men and women do not find the opportunity to fully develop their abilities, then you as their ruler will be without the proper assistance to realize your meritorious service, what you're supposed to be doing in, governing the people. So it's very much, the ruler is important as they are very much dependent on the people, and they have to ensure that the people have the opportunities, have the chances to be educated, to develop their talents and skills, to meaningfully contribute to realizing good government together. So the ruler is very important, but they're just one person at the end of the day, and they're not the most important, actually, because they are nothing without the people. So you're probably thinking, why would someone hold the people in disdain? The whole state is made up of people. Doesn't seem right. Well, I suppose there could be these reasons. Overinflated sense of self-importance, as Ying here warns against. This makes the ruler or leader arrogant. They feel that they don't need anybody else's ideas. They listen only to their own ideas. and nor do they value what other efforts or contributions other people might make to the team. And both of these sorts of symptoms really arise because they fail to understand the full scope of their role. So what should happen? In the Garden of Eloquence, which is a statecraft anthology that was compiled around the 1st century, we have this account by a state ruler himself. And he refers to King Yao, one of the legendary emperors that we've mentioned before. And he said, this was King Yao's attitude. He certainly didn't hold the people of the state in contempt. In fact, quite the opposite. He made all the people in the realm, all the realm, his concern. That was his focus. And he fixed his attention on those in suffering, those most in need. He was grieved when people suffered adversity. He was anxious when the multitudes failed to thrive. Even if a single one of the people suffered from want of food, he would take personal responsibility, say, I'm the cause of that man's hunger. When a single one of the people was cold, he would say, I'm the one who has exposed that man to cold. When a single one of the people was punished for an offense, he would say, I'm the cause of that man's entrapment. So you can see, ends with, this was the way of King Yao. There's a huge contrast between holding the people in disdain and really making them the focus of a ruler's, a state leader's attention, and taking personal responsibility for their well-being and welfare. And we see that not only with King Yao, but King Shun, when he ascends the throne, he is chosen to succeed after King Yao. He sort of throws open all of the channels of communication so that he could see and hear with all the ears and eyes of everyone and make the most informed decisions for the best interests of the people. So, deal. Okay. Now, what happens when the state leader fails to do this? I'll just stop sharing for a minute. I'll tell you the story that relates to King Li of the state of the Zhou dynasty. And this was about 1000, around 1000 before the Common Era. So a very long time ago. And basically, King Li of the Zhou dynasty, he was a tyrannical king, extremely unreasonable, very violent. And obviously everyone in the state was dissatisfied with him, complained about him, and the suffering that defines their lives. So one of his most senior advisors tries to tell the king that the people can't bear any much more of this, your despotic rule. They cannot endure this much longer. But the king doesn't care. So a classic example of holding the people in disdain, doesn't care, and feeling angry and wrathful about getting this sort of advice from this minister. The king even has a shaman have this person monitor, look out for any sign of dissent and criticism about him. And whenever the shaman reported any suspicious person, that person would be immediately put to death. So we can get a clear sense of how terrible this king really was. And of course, no one dares to criticize the king anymore. So the king is very happy about this and is so proud of himself that he talks to the senior advisor again. This was the Duke of Shah. And he said, look at me. I've stopped the criticism altogether. No one dares to oppose me or criticize me now. He sees this as a huge achievement. But the Duke pointed out to him that, look, you've only blocked the mouths of the people. And this is not a good idea at all. It's actually worse than blocking the way of a river. A river is a huge, rather large sort of watercourse. And when rivers are blocked, the water will continue or burst through the banks and cause a disastrous flooding. So this is no cause for any celebration at all. And the Duke draws an analogy between the words of the people and the water. There's blocking people's mouths is the same as blocking up the rivers. Now, just as those who regulate the rivers and waterways, they need to dredge the watercourse and ensure that the water is allowed to flow smoothly. Okay? So those who administer a state, they need to guide the people, allow them to express themselves freely. You have to listen to what they say, take the criticism on board, and to be able to actually govern the people. And on this particular slide, I'll share my screen again. On this particular slide, the Duke tries to tell King Li, this is what should happen. When the Son of Heaven, Son of Heaven being a reference to the sovereign who is entrusted with all the people of heaven to care for and to govern them. So when the sovereign attends to policy matters, when he goes about state administration, here's everyone from the highest ministers, the most senior advisors, down to the many retainers, present poems. The musicians would present their music, the scribes would present their writings, the masters would admonish, the blind would expound, sightless would recite. There's a difference actually between the blind and the sightless. The blind, the character in Chinese refers to people who've always not been able to see, and the sightless are those who have damaged their sight. So it seems like it's being repetitive, but basically everyone throughout different levels of the society or walks of life play a part in ensuring this remonstration, these words of feedback, constructive criticism reach the ruler. And it's on the back of all of this feedback that the king or the sovereign makes their considerations. Those are considered to be teachings. He has to make an informed decision, educate himself, inform himself, and make these better decisions. This is what should happen. But King Li has obviously blocked the mouths of the people. He's not interested in hearing any opposition, any sounds of dissent. He just has his own opinions. And that's really clearly not the way to go. So what happens to him? Well, the king ignores advice, obviously, and after 3 years of this enforced popular silence, the release of the accumulated pressure means that the king ends up being exiled far away. So he loses his whole ruleship. He's no longer the king anymore. This is a consequence of disdaining people, not caring about what they need. And I think that is a very extreme scenario, that it's a very clear-cut case that it's not sustainable, and all sorts of misfortune arises from that sort of misconduct and misdeed. Now, if we think about it, that was in the past. Relates to these officials and state leaders. But actually, these lines in the Exalted Treatise can apply equally to any person in a position of leadership, where they're responsible for the care of a group of people. Could be in an organization like a company, or a governmental institution, large and small. And on a day-to-day level, if you think about it, could be a school even. The principal of a school obviously has to look after the needs for the students, and those students don't come from nowhere. They come from families. So the school is actually serving the needs of that local community. The family is able to have a place to send their children to be educated at the very basic sense. And in turn, those communities make up a state, and states, if you in turn make up the rest of society in the world. So everyone really has a part to play, no matter how, no matter the organization, large or small. And companies very much are the same. They provide services or products to a certain section of the community. And by doing so, those communities, they're able to have an impact on society. And if you sort of drill down, well, okay, those sorts of leaders, not just the state leaders and officials in the past, well, obviously they can't disdain the people. They certainly shouldn't disrupt the administration of the state, nor their own organizations. But on a day-to-day level, you can think of the Way, which I'm sure most of us are very familiar with, that sort of offers a very concrete and simple, concise way of thinking about what's a better way. We know these are misdeeds. How can we do better? Let me show my slides again. In the Analects, there's Master Yo. He makes a point that there are few people who live according to family reverence and fraternity. That is, when we love and respect our family members, our siblings within the family, of course. But as we all know, family reverence extends beyond the family. It's how we treat many people beyond the family, our friends as well. So there are few who live according to family reverence and fraternity, and yet are fond of offending their superiors. This idea of creating disruption in the administration of government. There have been none who dislike offending their superiors, and yet are fond of creating disorder. So it confirms the link. The exemplary person, so someone who is committed to cultivating their good ethical character, works on the foundation. And what's the foundation? The foundation being established, the way it develops. Family reverence and fraternity, are they not the foundation of humanity? So Confucian learning was very much about cultivating one's good ethical character that would form the foundation, the very fundamental basis of all of our interactions and interpersonal relationships throughout our life. It would form the foundation for our career and whatever path we would choose to pursue, and it would form the very foundation of the families that young people would go on to establish. So at the very heart of it is family reverence and fraternity, this fraternity being this essential respect for elders, not just in the family, but beyond, in the community, for anyone who might be not just more senior in terms of age, but knowledge, experience, etc. So the sort of Confucian learning is very much grounded in the idea of day to day, how we go about treating other people the way they should. And the deeds of the way, which in English translates to guidelines for being a good person here, or guidelines for learners generally, is a text that came about around the 18th century. It was sort of composed by Li Yuxiu and then edited further later on by Jia Cunren. And it's derived from a passage of the Analects, which is reflected very much in its foreword or executive summary, if you like. So the guidelines for learners is comprised of instructions, the instructions of the sages. These were the enlightened thinkers in the past. First, as you would expect, it starts with practicing family reverence and fraternity, being cautious and trustworthy, love all, but be close to the benevolent. Want to learn from the positive role models. Then with energy to spare, study the arts. Now, I mentioned this forward and the deeds of way because it offers a very clear, concise, and simple structure to how we could do better than disdaining the people and disrupting the state administration. And there's been research in recent years that have actually looked at how the deeds of way has been implemented. Normally we read it as how we as individuals could apply it in our daily lives to the people around us. But very interestingly, research in recent years have studied the deeds of way, how it's been implemented on a corporate level, how companies have used it in their management of corporate management, how they go about training their staff, their employees, and to ensure employee well-being for the company as a whole. So how deeds of way works on a corporate level. And there are two studies I want to talk about. The first, I think, really warrants more time. The second one, I'll spend a short amount of time on. So this is, I'm sure we're all familiar with, the executive summary actually forms the outline of the deeds of way. It focuses on 7 chapters which relate to different aspects of daily life. But the research that I mentioned shows us how these 7 aspects relate to not just the daily life of people as personal individuals, but as employees within an organization, a company or business organization. And the first is a 2004, it was published in 2014 by Hugo Winkler. As you can see from the title of the study, it was published in the Asian Journal of Business Ethics, using the deeds of way to break away from a deteriorated business environment. and it selects a Beijing company as the focus of its case study. The company is owned by Hu Xiaoling. The company, this is the Chinese name, 北京汇通汇利技术开发有限公司. And it's a leading company in the heater manufacturing industry in Beijing. It's a fairly significant company as well because it actually has over 60% of the market share. And this was in 2014. How Winkler goes about his case study is it's based on semi-structured questionnaires that were sent to the owner and 4 key employees. That's the vice president and the heads of engineering, maintenance, and the marketing departments. And these questionnaires were sort of put together after sort of taking into account extensive sort of public seminars, conferences, and presentations that were already had already been presented by the company owner through different on different platforms. And so this wasn't sort of out of the blue, very, very much informed by what you could say Hu Xiaoling had presented before. And it also, Winkler also used historical analysis, comparing, well, how did Hu Xiaoling go about in the conduct of his business before adopting the Dizegui in his company as a basis of his company decision making, and sort of a before and after. How did he change? And it's very, very interesting. The first thing that he sort of notes is that, well, he reported that one of the main factors reported by customers as a key element in their choosing his products is their high degree of confidence that they were not going to be cheated. From the outset, Hu actually made a public commitment to becoming a vegetarian teetotaler. So being vegetarian in his diet and not taking alcohol. And he made it clear that he was learning the Dizegui, learning to practice the Dizegui, and also made it clear that it was very much part of the company, its identity, and this was throughout all of its marketing activities. So as a result, he found that, well, customers appreciated this difference in approach, and they chose his products because they felt that they could have confidence in him and his business. And by doing so, Hu Xiaoling changed the basis for competition. He no longer competes on price, but on differentiation of the service offered. So as you can imagine, different suppliers of these heaters, as long as it worked, well, you usually would choose the one that was cheapest. But the companies that he works, his market is in the business-to-business market, selling these heaters to real estate development companies. And he found that his clients, his consumers, chose him not according to his price-setting policy, but based on really what he offers. It wasn't just about the price at the end of the day. And that was through the fact that he made a change, very sort of 180-degree change in the way that he conducted his business, with the Dizegui forming the centerpiece and at the very core heart, sort of core considerations in his decision making. And well, the head of marketing actually reported this sort of the fact that the Dizegui formed the basis of his corporate decision making led to changes throughout the way he treated his clients, treated his competitors, other rivals within that industry, very competitive, and also with his suppliers. So there were flow-on effects that related to everyone in that industry. And his head of marketing reported that, because of the fact that the way he used to conduct business, he would go drinking with his clients and get drunk at least twice a week. And why he would do that was, well, it was generally the accepted way of doing business in China. And, refusing to drink would be considered rude and therefore ill-advised. That's really not the done thing to do. But unfortunately for Hall, he reported that, there came a point many years ago where his body could not, sustain that level of intoxication, that could not sort of bear any more the stress of such alcohol consumption. And so, in a way, he needed to make the change to stop drinking. And, a lot of people warned him that, this would drive business away. How could you negotiate or spend time with entertaining your consumers or your clients? But he ended up proceeding with that, following through on that decision. Paul expressed that although quitting alcohol appeared to be a poor idea, it was something that his health dictated. And what he discovered was that it actually worked out, not just in terms of the health benefits, but that he realized that it was not necessary to do as we are culturally expected to do. And taking a step-by-step approach, he decided to realign his business model in accordance with the teachings of Di Zigui. Now, for example, another one of his colleagues, they reported that they decided to change their negotiation strategy. So he's already stopped drinking. Now they're changing the way that they negotiate. Previously, the company would make offers as high as possible and then go down, sometimes quickly, so that they could keep their prices lower than their competitors in order to win the bid for new contracts. But, that wasn't actually, necessarily the best outcomes. And Hall decided to change this habit. What they do now, what the company does now, is to calculate their cost, their expected profit, and ask for a price, and with little room for negotiation. So they're fairly clear when it comes to their price nowadays, and they won't artificially reduce their price just to win new business. He distinguishes that clients are good, but not all clients. Not if it doesn't make sense for his business. There's a certain line that is, that just wouldn't make new businesses just not necessarily sustainable. So, and he based this, importantly, he based this decision on a principle of the Di Zigui that I'm sure that you're all familiar with. So on the next slide. Paul expressed that before he started to use the Di Zigui, he reverted to different means, how he treated his clients and competitors. He would criticize, talk negatively about his competitors, offer bribes, entice clients, and cut prices to win a bid for contract. And these are fairly standard ways of conducting business. But he realized that, based on the law of causation, which is what the whole Exalted Treatise is, underpins the whole Exalted Treatise, you get what you you reap what you sow. So how you treat others, if you criticize the competition, speak negatively, you try to cheat them, essentially, take advantage of the clients, well, then you'll end up, facing the negative consequences later. So he decided to focus his marketing strategy on what his company had to offer. What were their product specifications? How much better that was. And the fact that what was different about his company was they were trying to follow an ethical approach as outlined in the Deeds of Grace, so being very transparent. And it meant that the customers, their clients, developed a sense of security and confidence in their business. And this was a very distinctive part of their offering that, simply unmatched within that industry among their competitors. So just by making a commitment to operating ethically, being transparent about that, and focusing on what they really have to offer, because that's essentially what the client would end up getting. What did the client actually need? These were you would think that these were the basic elements of doing business. So getting down to the basics. And this is the particular passage in the Deeds of Grace. If someone asks us to do something, we're not sure whether it's appropriate, we should not carelessly promise. Just because there's a new client and the business is anxious to engage that client, there's no real justification for cutting their prices, especially if it's not a realistic and sustainable reduction. So if you do make such promises, they're inappropriate for the business, obviously, then whether you keep or break that promise will be wrong either way. So these were basic principles, and he used the Deeds of Grace very much as a lens for all of the decision making throughout his business. With his suppliers, previously, Hall reported that he didn't spare them a thought. He didn't care about his suppliers at all. So business, you would normally have your customers, other competitors, other companies competing for that business. But from the back end side of things, there are the suppliers that provide the essential parts or equipment needed to make the products. And previously, he basically did what everyone else did. You tried to sell for the cheapest price to win the business and end up sort of squeezing the suppliers. Selling at a cheaper price means that you try to pay your suppliers even less for the parts and the raw materials. And one day he was actually confronted by a supplier, and that particular supplier made it clear that they had run out of funds. And according to the terms of the contract, they wouldn't be paid anything until they had fully executed all of the work set out in that contract, which they couldn't do because they had run out of cash. And it's a very bleak outlook, and just brought home to him the real impact of the approach of not caring about the suppliers. And what he did was he looked at the Deeds of Grace, and he was able to retrieve simple moral rules, the importance of harmony, working together with others, not taking advantage of the suppliers to deliver the lowest prices for the customers, and also the rule of causation. It's described as Buddhist rule, but certainly, as we know, it sort of something that resonated through the Taoist tradition, through the Confucian tradition as well. And he used those principles as a framework for an economic analysis of the situation. And he decided ultimately to, instead of competing with his suppliers, to cooperate with them. And in the end, he decided to enhance his cooperation with his suppliers, develop a more integrated supply chain. So see them almost as partners in delivering for the consumers or the clients in that industry. So much more productive relationships with his suppliers, a more honest way of dealing with his clients and his competitors as well. And it also worked out obviously with the suppliers. And in this short table here, it sort of summarizes sort of the before and the after, and the principles that he relied on. Dizagui also makes the point that becoming drunk is unsightly. Try to take more than we give, and moving from the idea of competing with suppliers to cooperating with them to deliver the best for the customers, instead of slandering, criticizing the competitors, other players in the industry, or being mindful of the causation and actually focusing on what the company could actually offer. And basically, sort of the company moved from focusing just on the short term, maximizing profit, these emotional and interpersonal. He found that actually the more that he applied the Dizagui, his decisions became more analytical, more rational and objective, rather than being swayed by his emotions and making decisions based on interpersonal connections. And overall, shifting from a competitive approach where you don't care about anybody else except your own company, to a more cooperative, harmonious relationships with everybody involved: clients, competitors, suppliers. And this is the new basic underlying principle of his way of doing business now, is to create harmony. And the way that they've defined it is a non-competitive relationship based on trust and willingness to cooperate throughout the supply chain to create value. So a much more positive state of affairs. And that has sort of how the Dizagui has brought tangible economic improvement to the conduct of business in this leading company in Beijing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the other study that published a year later. And it looked to, whereas the previous study focused on sort of the suppliers, the externals, clients and competitors, this study looked at Dizagui, how Dizagui was used to improve the staff training, employee development, and their well-being, with employee well-being being defined as creating an environment to promote a state of contentment, allowing employees to flourish and achieve their full potential for their benefit and the benefit of the organization. And previous studies on employee well-being have focused on sort of three aspects. You have happiness, so how people feel about the job that they do, their workplace generally, their job satisfaction, their commitment to the organization. Also comes under happiness, the health, their personal employees, personal and mental health, from the perspective of the employer ensuring that there is a physically safe and stress-free work environment. And then relationships, the other aspect in terms of how employees interact with one another, the quality of the relationships among employees and between employees and their managers within the context of the workplace. So this was their concept of employee well-being, covering those 3 aspects. And what they did was they took they had another case study focused on another company. And this is a fairly large company, over 2,800 employees. It's a privately listed manufacturer of semiconductors in Suzhou, China. And they used the Dizigui ever since 2009 for their employee development and employee well-being. So basically they had training sessions and workshops for all employees across the company. Everyone received that training for the purpose of building a happy company. That was part of the company mission. And employees themselves becoming happier and better persons. Now, based on study of the company's policies and practices, the study conducted 35 in-depth one-on-one interviews with 8 managers and 27 employees. And on average, each interview lasted about an hour. So there were both managers and employees being interviewed as well. So this was their case study. What did they find? Well, the participants reported that learning the Dizigui, getting that training through their work at Good Arc, not only enhanced their individual identity within their family, their personal lives, but also a sense of belonging to that company as a large family. So the managers or the senior employees would be regarded as expected to care and look out for their employees within their remit, and the employees themselves. There's sort of a relationship of trust that they have to hold up their end of the bargain and be conscientious, diligent in performing their duties. So this sort of harmonious family relationship, if you like, within this large business meant that there was a strong trust between management and employees generally, and among colleagues generally. It also formed the balance of equality with respect, positive work attitude, and individual responsibility towards the workplace and the organisation as a whole. So there were profoundly positive impact on, you could say, employee well-being, but it was also translated to improved organisational performance. So it really worked out for the company as a whole. We had happier employees, but there was a positive impact on the bottom line. So you can see that the recent research highlights the amazing sort of results that could be achieved through the cultivation of good ethical character, not just on an individual level, but on a corporate level, where companies like Good Arc and the Beijing heater manufacturing company, they've really taken it on board, really cared for their all the people that their companies come interact with, from the point of view of the employees themselves, their well-being, their training and development, but also everyone else in that industry. As we've seen, the clients, the consumers, the competitors, and the suppliers. If we go back to the line in the Exalted Treatise, not disdaining the people, not disrupting the state administration. The Exalted Treatise and the Dizigui that we all know offers a lot in terms of being sources of inspiration in the way that we interact with others, as individuals on a day-to-day basis, but also in respect of our respective organizations that we're a part of. And we may not be in positions of responsibility, but because of that, the fact that we've cultivated our character and we interact with others in a responsible way, in an ethical way, it means that we're able to have this influence or impact on the people that we come across and the people that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, even if they haven't had the opportunity to learn about the Exalted Treatise or the deeds of way, they too can benefit from our very example. So I think that's a really special thing about this idea of Confucian learning. That's in this Taoist primer. It's the Exalted Treatise, this basic cultivation of good ethical character that sort of resonates across all of China's traditions, whether we were talking about Confucian, Taoist, or Buddhist thought traditions. So I'll leave you on that note. I thought it was incredibly inspiring reading about those companies in recent research. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you very much for your kind attention. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.